Hi, Year 5. Right, Chapter 17, Band of Beetle Brothers. Darkus put his eye to the crack in the kitchen door. Pickering was setting the table for supper. "Tomorrow I'll be rich," Pickering said, hugging himself. He started humming and then burst into song. "Take a gold coin, spin it in the air. The next day, boom, you're a millionaire." "Singing about me again?" Humphrey spun around, clutching a white plastic bag. Tucked under his opposite armpit was Bertolt's box. Darkus felt his pulse quicken. He silently ushered the beetles through the crack in the door. This needed to work, or their whole plan would fall apart. "Look what I found on the doorstep." Humphrey ripped open the box and lifted out 2 bottles of champagne. "It says they're from Lucretia Cutter." He slid a bottle across to Pickering, giving his own a shake. He popped the cork, tipped back his head, and poured a fountain of champagne in the direction of his face. "Hell, I love that woman." Pickering carefully filled a yellow mug with the bubbling liquid. "A toast." He raised his cup to Lucretia Cutter. Humphrey clanked his bottle against it. "A fine, mighty fine woman." He thumbed the lids off the silver trays of food as he pulled them out of the bag, then grabbed the bucket of cranberry sauce from the counter and sat down to eat. Snatching up a duck dumpling, he dunked it in the cranberry sauce and stuffed it in his mouth. Darkus could see Baxter was ready, in position on the ceiling. Underneath the table was a unit of shiny, black, fat-tailed blister beetles and the scruffy, diabolical, ironclad beetles who looked like blobs of rust. "Do you have to eat with your mouth open?" Pickering said, sitting down opposite. Humphrey burped. "Oops, bubbles." "You're a pig," Pickering tutted. "Eating with your hands, drinking from the bottle." "It's a Chinese takeaway. That's how you're supposed to eat it," Humphrey scoffed. "Anyway, my way means there's less washing up." Pickering and Humphrey glared at each other across the table. Darkus gave the signal to the waiting emerald-green tiger beetles, huddling under the lip of the table. They immediately raced up onto the surface, dashing over Pickering and Humphrey's food. They moved so fast Darkus couldn't see them, but he definitely noticed when they slowed down, crawling towards the edge and then grinding to a halt. "Something's wrong," Darkus hissed to the 4 dung beetles waiting by his feet. "Washing up? You never do any washing up," Pickering snapped, spooning noodles into his mouth. "That's because I don't make a mess." "What?" Pickering went purple. "What is that revolting thing in your bedroom if it isn't a ginormous mess of washing up?" Darkus saw that Baxter had dropped down from the ceiling and was hovering above the table. There was something wrong with the tiger beetles. "How can you say you don't make any mess?" Pickering asked, outraged. "Because it's the truth," Humphrey said, eating 2 spring rolls at once. Pickering angrily grabbed up his mug and threw his champagne in Humphrey's face, hitting the hovering rhinoceros beetle and flinging him onto Humphrey's nose. Shocked, Humphrey jerked backwards, knocking Baxter into his noodles, his chair tottering and then crashing to the ground. Pickering was on his feet, screeching with laughter. "Look at you," he cackled. Humphrey waggled his arms and legs frantically, trying to get up. You look like a giant beetle," Pickering roared and slapped his knees with delight. "Get in there and get them all out," Darkus hissed. The dung beetles reared up and waggled their legs, then took off and zoomed into the kitchen. They landed on the table and quickly loaded the tiger beetles onto their backs. The blister beetles and ironclad beetles ran up the table legs to help Baxter. Darkus held his breath as he watched. Baxter was tangled up in the noodles and couldn't get free. Pickering turned back to his dinner. "Humphrey," he said, scratching his head, "the table is covered in beetles. I think they're trying to eat our food." "What?" Humphrey grabbed the tabletop and heaved himself onto his knees, his nose level with the table surface. The blister beetles pulled Baxter from the tray of noodles. The rhinoceros beetle stumbled as he tried to fly. On the 3rd attempt, he was airborne. Pickering grabbed a flying pan and used it like a tennis racket and hit Baxter to the floor. "Blasted beetles," Humphrey roared. "Take that!" He pounded the diabolical ironclad beetles with his sledgehammer of a fist. "Got them!" He lifted his hand and looked. The diabolical ironclad beetles ran forwards to form a defensive circle, back to back with the blister beetles. Humphrey was surprised to see them move. "They should be dead. I gave them a good wallop." "Bet they wouldn't live if we put them through your mincer," Pickering said, picking up Baxter by the horn. Darkus was up on his feet, not knowing what to do. He couldn't let them mince Baxter. Humphrey clapped his hands gleefully and ran to the cupboard beside the sink, pulling out a silver and red meat-mincing machine with a crank handle. Pickering dropped Baxter onto his palm and slotted his hand under the table, sweeping all the other beetles into it, bringing his other hand over the top to make a cage. "Ouch!" Pickering's fingers sprang open. The skin on his palm was beginning to blister. "Ah, it's burning me!" The beetles quickly scrambled up onto the rhinoceros beetle's thorax, and Baxter was up in the air and flying towards the door with a diabolical ironclad beetle dangling from his horn. Ah! Pickering ran to the sink, spun the coal tap and thrust his hand under the water. It burns! It burns! That is why they're called blister beetles, Darkus whispered, pushing the door open a fraction to receive Baxter and the other beetles before silently creeping away. Darkus crept back into Humphrey's bedroom, carrying Baxter in his hands. His shoulders were littered with sleeping tiger beetles and exhausted dung beetles. A raggle-taggle posse of blister and diabolical ironclad beetles clung to the sleeves of his green jumper. Part 1 of the mission is complete, he whispered triumphantly. Now we have to wait and see if Bertolt's mum's sleeping pills work. They'll work, Bertolt said. When they're mixed with alcohol, they'll knock out an elephant. Help me push the armchair up against the door, Darkus said, carefully delivering his cargo of beetles to the foot of the mountain. What happened to the tiger beetles? Virginia asked as they pushed. I think the sleeping powder must have got into their spiracles and knocked them out, Darkus replied. They dropped it over the food just fine, but then it was as if they wound down like clockwork. The dung beetles had to fly them out. I think Baxter might have been affected too. He got knocked into a plate of food and now he's acting woozy. At Baxter's call, every beetle in the building gathered on Beetle Mountain. The surface seethed and shimmered with brightly coloured insects. Darkus tried to take them all in, but there were so many different species, shapes and colour of beetle that his mind couldn't hold on to it. Dung beetles, jewel beetles, giraffe-necked weevils, goliaths, stags, bombardiers, fireflies, lavender beetles, ladybirds, Atlas, Hercules and Titan beetles, tiger beetles, rhinoceros beetles, carpet beetles, deathwash and tok-tokkies, hammering their heads and abdomens against the cup for all they were worth. His breath caught in his throat as he recognised the true power of these beetles. Suddenly he understood why his dad thought beetles could save the planet, but right now they needed him to save them, and he wasn't about to let them down. Uncle Max was sitting outside in the sycamore tree with a branch wedged under his armpits, staring wide-eyed and open-mouthed through the window. Are you okay? Darkus waved at his uncle. Uncle Max saluted a speechless reply. The beetles fell silent as Darkus came to stand in front of them. Between Virginia and Bertolt, a million compound eyes looked at him, waiting for him to speak. Lucretia Cutter is coming, he said. The beetles hissed. And we cannot stop her, he paused, but we can fight her. The beetles stamped their feet. And we will fight her. He took a deep breath. Your enemy is my enemy. Lucretia Cutter has kidnapped my father and is holding him prisoner in her house. Tomorrow, when she's here, I'm going to rescue him. The room hummed and clicked. But, he raised his voice over the noise, I can only do it with your help. There was silence, and Baxter lifted into the air, waggling his front legs and beating his soft wings in a rhythmic pattern. Will you help me? I need a small tactical division of beetles to help me get into towering heights and get my dad out. A soft drumming of horns, jaws and legs on porcelain answered him, and a troop of bombardier beetles scurried forwards. They'd be useful, Darkus knew, because of the acid they fired from their abdomens. They were joined by speedy and vicious tiger beetles, dung beetles, fire beetles, good for illumination, and a battalion of Hercules and Titan beetles, all known for their strength. Darkus knelt down. Thank you, my friends. He turned and pointed. That's my Uncle Max outside in the tree. Uncle Max waved. Follow him down to the car. This way, Uncle Max called as he climbed clumsily down the tree. Darkus stood up, watching the beetles troop out through the window, and then turned back to the mountain. Lucretia Cutter has a daughter called Novak, he said, and she's on our side. He remembered Novak stretched out on the floor, unconscious. She needs a friend, and we need a spy in that house to find out what Lucretia Cutter is doing. Is there a beetle brave enough to volunteer? She's getting a beetle, Virginia said jealously. A group on the side of the mountain parted, and a jewel beetle, the size of a golf ball and shaped like a coffee bean, flew up to Darkus's outstretched hand. She had a neat pin-like head with delicate antennae, a perfectly rounded thorax, and iridescent rainbow-coloured elytra. Oh, my goodness, she's so pretty, Bertolt marvelled. Novak's going to love her. The beetle seemed to like the attention and flickered her elytra open, showing off the bright colours of her wing cases. Virginia glared at the beetle. Great, she muttered. Now everyone's got a beetle except for me. Darkus pulled Virginia forward to stand beside him. I won't be here when Lucretia Cutter comes, but Virginia will be by your side as you fight. She will be able to understand what the humans are doing and help command your troops. Listen to her. Virginia smiled and waved awkwardly. Tonight we move Beetle Mountain downstairs to your new home in the sewer and make it impossible for Lucretia Cutter to follow you. I'm helping with that, Bertolt blurted out proudly, and an excited Newton rose up out of his hair, glowing brightly. Together, Darcus said, we'll show Lucretia Cutter that our lives are not hers to control. A high humming sound from the mountain, filling the air like a sustained note from a violin. A second harmonising note joined the first, and then a third as a swarm of tiny green and yellow iridescent beetles hovered above the mountain surface, their wings vibrating in unison. Battalion after battalion of black stag beetles marched over the peak of the mountain, coming to a halt and beating their jaws on the crockery surface. The drumming was melodic, like a miniature steel band. The humming and drumming became insistent, crescendoing as the beetles fell into military formations. The weird and wonderful music grew louder and more frenzied as the beetles marched, and the mountain reverberated with the rhythm of war. Darcus surveyed the ranks of beetle soldiers stretched out before him and hoped that Lucretia Cutter was not prepared for what she was about to face. Surprise was the best weapon they had. In this battle, he said, victory is survival. He raised his fist, and we will be victorious. The room erupted. Beetles flew into the air, looping in and out of dancing swarms, light ricocheting off their outstretched elytra and radiating from their iridescent markings. Darcus smiled at Virginia and Bertolt. It felt amazing to be finally fighting back. There was a fire in his belly and a grit in his soul, and he wasn't the least bit frightened. Tonight, he was going to get his dad back. Okay, have a lovely weekend, guys. See you Monday.